It's time for another tier list here on the FMSCOUT channel, but today, instead of looking at players like we normally do, we're going to be focusing on finding what is the best role in Football Manager. Hello everyone, Jake here for FMSCOUT. Welcome to the video. A few things before we do get started on this tier list. Firstly, maybe the most obvious one, if you watch any of our other videos, I might sound pretty strange right now. I am pretty ill, so I might have a few cuts in this video where I'm trying to get around me coughing and spluttering, but we're here anyway. We're going to try and do a tier list, which, the second thing I need to mention, is all my opinion. Every player role in Football Manager can be useful in some way in certain tactics, but I'm going to give my opinion. There's a good chance it doesn't match up to yours, so I want you to let me know in the comments down below your favourite roles in the game. If I've got any particularly wrong, we've got plenty of roles to get through, so I won't waste too much time. If you do enjoy the video, smash the like button for us, and let's get started. So we've got our tiers here. We have got the GOAT, which will go to one or maybe a few of the best roles in FM23. We've got Great, which are obviously the other ones are also really good, but maybe not the best. Usable, the ones that are good when used. They're fine, they're not going to do anything too special. Meh, the ones that are kind of like, I'd rather use this role instead of this role. And then Avoid, the ones that I think just aren't worth having in your team whatsoever. Again, all my own opinions, but that is our roles. Now, this tier list on the website was created during FM21, so there is a role that's missing here, which is wide centre back. Maybe there's more, but I think that's the only one that's missing. I would probably put that in the meh tier, maybe usable. I don't think it's an amazing role. I used it when they first brought it around, but since then, it's never really wowed me too much. So with that being said, we've covered the ones that aren't on this list. So let's get cracking, because we have got, what's this, like 40 odd roles to get through, so we need to move quite quickly. Now, the first two that I'm going to get out of the way pretty quickly are the goalkeeping roles. Now, I don't really find these roles make a huge difference. Obviously, most people play with a sweeper keeper nowadays to play in a more modern style, but if you pick one and not the other, it's not really going to break your game. It's not going to make your tactic crazy good or anything like that. They're just the goalkeeping roles, so for that reason, I'm going to put them in meh, and because I prefer sweeper keeper, I'll put that slightly higher than the goalkeeping option. Now, a role that I'm going to put straight in the avoid section, and you can criticise me if you want to, you guys might have a lot of success with it, but no nonsense fullback. Who is using that? I mean, if you're going to use a fullback in your system, at least let them go forward a little bit, whether that's wing back, inverted wing back, just a fullback in general, but no nonsense fullback. If you're having to play one of them in your team, it's probably about time you try and find someone with a bit more ability than using this role. Next, we've got wide target man. I'm not too sure about this one. I must say, some of these I haven't used to their fullest extent. Some of them, and I'll talk about them a little bit later, I have never used at all. So I'll try and be unbiased on those ones, but wide target man, I mean, I don't really see too many people using an actual left mid, right mid in their tactics. It tends to be more winger positions, but either way, a wide target man. If you're going to have a player playing out wide, I think there's much better options than wide target man. There's some players that it really suits. I guess Mandzukic kind of did it a few years ago for Juventus, but I'm not rating it very highly. I'm going to say personally, it's hard to say avoid because I haven't used it too much. I think I'm going to put it on the low end of meh. Again, I might run through some of these quite quickly to get through the big list that we've got, and there might not be too much explanation, but why Playmaker? I just think there's better options out there than that. I mean, it's not a terrible role. I just don't think it's one of my favourites. Winger, I'm not too sure about this one. I think there's much better roles in that position that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's certainly not unusable if you've got a player whose pure pace is just going to bomb down the wings, particularly in the lower divisions. A winger can be quite handy. So for now, we'll put that in the usable tier. Wide midfielder, for me it just falls into the same category as wide target man and wide playmaker. I'd probably put playmaker a little bit higher than some of these, but the wide midfielder isn't one I've used all that often, so I'm going to put it in the meh tier for now. We have got the wing back role, one of my favourites in Football Manager. It doesn't quite make GOAT, but for me, if I'm having a fullback in my team, it's near enough always the wing back. I like them bombing up and down, creating chances, getting crosses in, and the wing back role is perfect for this, so I'm going to put that in the great tier. Our first entry in one of the high tiers. This is going to be a very, very full tier list by the time we're done, because we've got so many left to go through yet. We've got a Segundo Volante here, a role that I've only started using quite recently, but it's one I've had a lot of success with and one that I rate very, very highly. I don't think it's quite in the GOAT category. I think there's better midfield options in this one, but I'm going to put it as great. If you haven't tried a Segundo Volante, they can be very good. Now, the next one is the one I mentioned earlier that I haven't really used. I can't remember using it at all, in all honesty, and that is the Trequartista, which also is very similar to the Raumdeuter for me. Two roles I haven't really used too much, if at all. I can't really remember any specific examples, so I'm just going to put them in the meh tier. It doesn't mean they're bad, I just haven't used them, so I'm not going to give them a specific place on this list. Target man, now this is a role that I have actually had a lot of success with, particularly last year in a two-striker formation, having one as the target man and maybe having an advanced forward playing off of them. I think target man is a solid role, particularly in the lower divisions, and for that reason, it is usable. I don't think it's amazing, but it's certainly a usable usable role, and now we get on to one of my favourites, one that I don't quite think I'll put in GOAT, but as far as that cam, attacking midfield position, whatever you want to call it goes, I think Shadow Striker is certainly one of the best you can get. I'm going to put that in the great category. I love a Shadow Striker. They get you goals, they get you assists. Imagine an Nkunku style player, Dele Alli in his prime, that kind of thing. Shadow Striker can be perfect if you're trying to have a secondary player getting up there alongside your striker and scoring goals from that attacking midfield spot. Roaming Playmaker is an interesting one. I did a Leicester save on my own channel, which by the way, if you want to check that out, it's all linked in the description down below. Any support over there would be awesome. But the Roaming Playmaker was one I tried to use. I believe it was with Dewsbury Hall, maybe Yuri Tielemans or someone like that playing in this Roaming Playmaker role, and I didn't mind it. It just never really blew me away. I don't see too much separation between that and the deep line Playmaker. It's a fine role. It's just not one that I would actively choose on another occasion. I think there's better midfield roles than that, and it is quite often pretty hard to find a player who really suits the Roaming Playmaker perfectly. Next we have Regista. There is another role in this position I prefer more, so I'm not going to rate this too highly. It is a usable role, and for me, that's about as far as it goes. Next we have, and this is going to be quite controversial for some I'm sure, the poacher role, which for me, that's got to go straight in the avoid tier. I mean, as far as striker roles go, the poacher is the one that requires the least ability. Maybe they're a good finisher, good anticipation, and that's pretty much it. If they've got no physical attributes, maybe you'd want them to be a poacher. But realistically, if you've got a striking option and his best role is poacher, you're probably better to go out and sign someone with some physical ability. In this year's Football Manager, a little bit of pace goes a long way. Having good physical attributes can really outweigh finishing. If you had a player with 18 pace and acceleration and 9 finishing, or a player with the opposite, let's say 18 finishing and 9 pace and acceleration, I promise you, the one with the pace is going to score more goals. If you haven't used a poacher in your system, I personally think it might be time to find a new striker. Pressing forward, a role that I used to use a hell of a lot, maybe not so much anymore, but it is a very viable option up top. If you've got someone with high work rate, it can be a very handy role. I'm going to put it in the usable section. No nonsense centre back. Some people are going to really like this one. I'm not going to say avoid, because sometimes you do just have them centre-backs with no ability other than being able to clear it away. I'd argue you can still get away with playing them on the central defender role as opposed to a ball player. But if you're a relegation threatened team or something and you want a player that's just going to head the ball away, hoof it clear, and that's it, then maybe you want to use no nonsense. But for me, it's certainly just in the mess section. I'm not a big fan at all. But our next one is where it starts to get really interesting. Some of you might disagree, but Mezzala for me has been and will always be, I think, for the next few years, one of the most successful roles you can possibly use in Football Manager. If you've seen any of our Wonderkid to Superstars where we look at central midfielders, I often put them on the Mezzala role. It's great if you've got someone who's got good finishing ability, good passing ability, someone that can score goals from the midfield, particularly if you don't have a number 10 and you have your Mezzala as kind of the furthest forward thinking central midfielder. It can be very beneficial. I'm going to put it in the GOAT category. I love a Mezzala, and I imagine a lot of you guys will as well. Next we've got the Libero. For me, I'm just going to put this in the meh tier. I'm not a huge fan of it. I can't say I've used it all that often. When I have, it's never really blown me away, so I'm sticking it in meh. I have kind of given up on ordering these in the specific sections they're in, so kind of just trust the tiers as opposed to where they're actually placed, because there is still so many to get through. And we are looking at another one of my favourites, inverted winger. If you've got a player who's playing on the side of his weak foot, aka a Mahrez style, an Arjen Robben style, where you want them to cut in onto their strong foot, I basically just have a decision in my head where I go, are they better at finishing or better at crossing? If they're better at crossing, they will be an inverted winger for me, and an inverted winger always seems to do well, so I'm going to rate that pretty highly. Next we have inverted wingback. This is usable, becoming more acceptable in the modern game now for sure. I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe FM21 or 22, where it was near enough broken, but it's kind of settled down now in terms of its ability. I still think it's powerful, but for me personally, I still prefer the wingback, the fullback, that we're going to have a look at later. Next we have the inside forward position, which for me is going to be one of the best. I say I usually have a choice between inverted winger or inside forward, depending on if they've got finishing or crossing, but you best believe I'm always crossing my fingers, hoping that they're going to be a better finisher, because if you have a good inside forward in your team, they can be absolutely deadly, and you'll see most tactics I ever used that are created by myself will have an inside forward and a Mezzala in there. Next we're going on to the halfback role. This is a role that I've started using a lot more frequently, which I think is better than the Regista role, which we looked at earlier, so for that reason I'm going to put halfback pretty high in the usable section. I think people are starting to use it a lot more recently, that linchpin player that comes comes back, drops from the midfield between your two centre-backs almost, and helps create play from there. If you've got a good half-back, you are going to be very solid defensively. Next, we've got full-back. I think this is just a poor man's option compared to wing-back, but it is still a good role to have. A full-back on the attack, a full-back on support can be very handy. I've just always tended to favour wing-back, so for that reason, it's in the usable section. It's fine. It just doesn't really blow me away on a massive level. False 9. This is a very interesting one. Obviously, it requires a very specific kind of player to have a false 9 in your team. And I'm not saying it's an awful role or an awful tactical idea to use a false 9. Often, if done well, it can be very creative and very effective. However, I'm going to put it in the meh tier because I just think even if your player doesn't look like he'd be a good advanced forward or, you know, a complete forward, whatever it might be, if you slap that role on him instead, I still think you'd see better results than a player that was actually naturally suited to the false 9, purely because of how the roles work in game. I don't think it's a particularly effective one this year round, so for me, false 9 is going in meh. If you're going to have a striker, there are better roles out there. Next, we go on to the Ungonch, another one that I'm actually not too familiar with. I guess I need to be a little bit more creative when it comes to my tactics. Try and use some of these roles. I'm going to stick it in the meh tier for now because I don't know enough, but if you guys have really strong opinions on the Trequartista, on the Unganch, Libero or Reimdeuter, let me know. If you really suggest one highly enough, maybe I'll try and put it into my next tactic. But now we have defensive winger. Very limited options in terms of players that really suit this. I don't think there's many tactics that will benefit from this too much. Likely if you're playing some kind of defensive football system that not many people play. So for me, I would say avoid defensive winger. I just don't think it's particularly effective in game, at least from what I've seen of it, and it's not one that I hear many people clamouring about, saying it's amazing. So for me, I'm going to stick it in the avoid section. I can already tell, by the way, this is going to be a controversial video. The same with all our tier lists, really. Everyone's got their own opinion, so do bear that in mind. But yes, we're going for defensive midfielder next. A solid role for sure. Not one that's going to blow anyone away, I don't think, but a very handy role. Next, we've got deep line Playmaker. This is one that I am a pretty big fan of, one that I use regularly in a lot of my tactics. Is it ever really super effective? I don't think so, but it is a usable role, features in a lot of my tactics and never really has negative effects, although you might argue it doesn't always have the most positive effect either. It's just kind of a player that I have in there, making the play tick along. Maybe it's the game's fault for not giving great average match ratings to a deep line Playmaker, but we're going to put it in the usable tier. Next, we've got deep line forward. Again, this might be controversial, but I'm just putting that in meh. I don't think it's a great striking option. I think there's plenty of different roles, even if you don't think your player suits these other roles, where you would still score more goals than sticking them on deep line forward. Next, complete wing back. Very specialised position for players that are really good at going forward. It's good, it's usable, but I don't think it's quite great as wing-back is, which is a lot more friendly to most players. A lot of players able to play wing-back quite comfortably. Central midfielder, interestingly enough, if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have maybe had this in meh, usable at most, but when you put that central midfielder on the attack duty or support, you can get so many great results, and for that reason, it is going straight into the great category for me here. Complete forward is another one. If you get a player, very specialised position of course, that can play as a complete forward, good physically, good passer, good dribbler, good goal scorer. If you get a player who can play that, it's one of the most elite roles you can get, but you really need someone that suits it well. Next, central defender, usable, perfectly fine. We all need them in our team. Sometimes you want a ball-playing defender or a central defender. It depends on whether that player has got the passing ability, but it's certainly a usable role, one that's commonly used as well. Corelio, again, another one I'm going to put in usable. I don't think it blows anyone away. I don't think it does anyone too much harm. There are some tactics that really exploit the Corellios to make them really good in game, but I just think overall it's a fine role. I think the central midfielder role, the Mezzala role, can often have better effects. Ball-winning midfielder, again, for me, is similar to deep line Playmaker and defensive midfielder. Not really going to do anything too special, but if you've got a player that's just a destroyer, they're not going to get great average match ratings, but they will certainly do the job in your team. Ball-playing defender, one that suits the modern-day centre-backs with the ability to pass the ball. I tend to prefer, if I can, to have a ball-playing defender in my team over a central defender. Usually I try and pair the two together. Depends on the kind of centre-backs you've got, but it is certainly a usable option. Box-to-box midfielder, again, another one that a few years ago I might have said was a little bit better. Nowadays, though, it's usable, it's fine. Is it blowing anyone away? I'm not too sure. Box to box, if you've got to play with good work rate, good box ability in the attacking sense, and also can defend well, it's a really handy role to have if you have a player that suits it, because it does allow some of the pressure to come off of your central midfielders that are maybe thinking about scoring more goals. With the box to box there, they've got a little bit more cover. Advanced Playmaker, You know what, I just prefer Shadow Striker. There's nothing wrong with an advanced playmaker, but I'm going to have that in the usable section. Anchorman, again, maybe usable, maybe meh, probably borderline for me. I'm going to put it in the meh section just because there's a lot in this usable section already, the average roles, if you will. Anchorman, I just feel like there's better roles out there than that. Attacking midfielder, for me, goes in meh. Again, another one where I'm looking at advanced playmaker and Shadow Striker as better roles in that area. Of course, it depends on the player, but I never really see an attacking midfielder really blowing up in a game, doing amazing. But who knows, maybe you guys have got tactics that really suit these players. And finally, and I didn't actually plan for this, I hadn't actually planned out my rankings before this video, nor did I order any of these down here, but advanced forward is our last one. And for me, simple. It is the best role there is. I think as far as striker roles go, there's not many people that would debate that. If you've got a player that maybe likes to beat the offside trap, has a bit of pace about them, even if they can't finish, if they can't dribble, if they can't pass, they will still score a ton of goals. I love an advanced forward. I think it's a simple role for most players to play as well. Most strikers seem to suit it quite nicely. And that is our tier list of the best roles in Football Manager complete. Again, apologies for the voice. I am pretty ill and I've been trying to get through this. All the lights on my face really making me sweat, but we are done. There is our player rankings. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. You're bound to disagree. Maybe you agree, and that'd be nice to have someone out there that does. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Most of all, though, have a great day, everyone. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, and goodbye.